actual lecture of our course, Christianity in a Global Context, Christian Theology in a Global Context, actually. The lecture today is What is a Worldview, though we are going to cover a bit more than that. This is based on the residency lecture that we did a little while ago. And so you can see here, I've got a hyperlink for the residency lecture. I also got a QR code up here, so if you want to use either of those, you can to download this. But you don't have to. I have adjusted this slightly from when we did this in the residency, updated it a little bit with some additional info. So even if you were there during that lecture, you still will get some additional content this way. So our image here actually plugged into AI. A question asked it to create an image for me on Worldview, and this was one of the options, and I just thought this was really, really neat looking. You have this kind of gilded frame, and then through the frame you're kind of looking at the world, and you have these weird AI birds that almost look like birds if you're not really paying attention to them, but also don't look like birds. So, yeah, fun times. So, a little bit about me, in case you don't know me yet. It's kind of an important thing to talk about. I have a bachelor's in biblical studies from Life Pacific University. That's where I met my wife, Samantha, who is pictured here in her Hogwarts attire. She is Hufflepuff, and so married her in 2008. Our son, John Marshall, was born in 2014, and he's there dressed up as a skeleton. Our daughter, Amelia Isley, who is there as the mermaid, was born in 2016. This is from a couple of years ago, so they've grown a lot since then. So, man, kids grow up so fast, don't they? When you don't have kids, you hear that and you think, gosh, that's a cliche. And then when you have kids, you're like, wow, they really do grow up so fast. Anyway, so this is me. I'm here dressed up as Fat Thor from the Marvel comics, because Marvel finally gave me somebody that I could cosplay as, so decided to take advantage of that. I have a master's in Christian thought from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, where I focused on the patristic period and how they interpreted Scripture. And I am currently working on a PhD at Ridley College, which is a school in Australia, and my dissertation is on the early history of biblical interpretation in the patristic period, which is roughly 180 to 800 AD. So that is kind of the area of my expertise. That said, world religions have actually, become kind of a passion of mine, and almost ended up being a topic for my dissertation as well. Ended up for several years actually teaching world religions at a local state university, in addition to teaching an undergraduate course in world religions here at Life Pacific. And actually for about 3 years running, my primary teaching discipline between those two different schools was world religions. So I've taught world religions for quite a while, and really, really fascinated by it. When I finished my PhD, I think one of my first projects after that might be to transition from early biblical interpretation to looking at how the Quran receives biblical texts, because there's a lot of references to biblical material in the Quran and that sort of thing. So really interested in that kind of stuff. But we'll talk about that more when we get to the Islam lecture. So moving forward, our goals for today, we're going to talk a little bit about religious literacy. We're going to try to define worldview. We're going to give a few examples of worldviews. And then we're going to attempt a brief definition of religion. Now, defining worldview could be an entire course. Defining religion could be an entire course. So, we're going to have to keep that quick. But we're gonna wade into that a little bit. Okay. So the first thing I want to do, just in terms of religious literacy, is just kind of look at these images, and I want you to take a second and try to see, what do you see here that you might recognize, that you might be able to connect with something. A lot of times the first thing that people notice is the beads down here. And almost always, though there have been exceptions to this, almost always people will say that this is a rosary. This is not a rosary. If it was a rosary, there would be a crucifix on the end, and there's not a crucifix there. So we don't have that. These are actually Muslim prayer beads, so that's a different thing. If you may also recognize up here of this elephant god. Elephant god's got 4 arms. This is Ganesha or Ganesh, and Ganesh actually was sort of a normal human, but got his head chopped off, and there was an elephant nearby, and so one of the other gods took the head from the elephant, kind of slapped it on his body, and gave him an elephant head. So Ganesh is a remover of obstacles in Hinduism. Over here, you may notice in this meditative pose, this is Buddha. There's 2 variations of Buddha. I like to call them Fat Buddha and Skinny Buddha. So depending on what area of the world you're looking at, and what kind of Buddhism you're talking about, you can see either Fat Buddha or Skinny Buddha, which is just super interesting. But we'll talk about that more when we get to Buddhism. And then we have this this candelabra, right? This is a menorah, and the menorah is for Hanukkah, and that's the 7 nights that the oil lasted. So this is in Judaism. And our last image here is this guy right here. So you see a few things. One, you see the sheep here. You know, you see our staff here with a little crook at the end. So this is probably a shepherd. But you also see the halo, and you see his arms up in this position. This position is called the orans. The orans position is kind of hands up to pray. You see this a lot in early Christian artwork. This is sort of a artistic depiction of Jesus. Ich bin der gut Hirt is I am the good shepherd. Pardon my German pronunciation there. I'm not fluent in German, so might have botched that pronunciation. But this is from Christianity, right? So that's what we've got there. So these are, pretty major world religions, and in general, most people aren't going to recognize most of these. Definitely not going to recognize the Muslim prayer beads. A lot of times people don't recognize Jesus here. These are pretty common depictions of these. So we just want to think in terms of religious literacy here, because you're going to be ministering in a world where people believe these things, right? If you go to be a chaplain in the military or something like that, you are going to be serving people who hold these faiths. And so you should know something about them. If you're going to be a responsible citizen of the world, then you should know something of the religions of the world. So there's this religious literacy quiz that we're going to go through really briefly. This is based on a guy named Stephen Prothero, and he reported his numbers for these quizzes in 2006, 2007. There's 297 students participating, and it's just really interesting to look through these questions and then see the data on how people did. Okay. So we're just going to start off, and I'm going to give you a couple of seconds as I'm reading through them to kind of think through whether or not you know the answers. Feel free to pause the video if you want to give yourself some extra time. So name the 4 Gospels, list as many as you can. This should be pretty simple for you as a Christian. You should know the 4 Gospels, and maybe you even know some of the Gnostic Gospels, depending on how much study you've done. On average, out of the 297 students, each student got 2.3 Gospels. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. 8% said Paul. Others said Joshua, Mary, and Jeremiah. Joshua, Mary, and Jeremiah are pretty out there. I've gotten Moses. I got Muhammad once. Just get some weird stuff there. Now that was at the secular university. That wasn't at LPU, thankfully. So, name a sacred text of Hinduism. This one tends to throw people because most people just haven't done much in the way of studying Hinduism. 26%, which is actually higher than I would have expected, named one of the sacred texts of Hinduism, And some examples of that are the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Mahabharata, the Kama Sutra, and the Ramayana. And so these are some of the sacred texts of Hinduism, but we'll talk about them in more detail when we get to Hinduism. Others said Torah and Bible. My favorite answer to this question in all of the years that I've taught world religions is I had a student once who just answered oof. That's all he wrote here. Name a sacred text of Hinduism. Oof. Just didn't know what to do. So, name a holy book of Islam. 85% correctly named the Quran. So did pretty well there. Hopefully that's something that you were aware of as well. Where, according to the Bible, was Jesus born? This is kind of one of those Bible trivia things that will sometimes stump people. 60% correctly answered with Bethlehem. 15% said Jerusalem. A lot of people actually say Jerusalem, so I was a little surprised that it was only 15% in Prothero's study. George Bush, this is talking about George W. Bush, I think, but I could be wrong about that. Spoke in his first inaugural of the Jericho Road. What Bible story is he invoking with that? Now, immediately, most people, when they see Jericho, they're going to think of Joshua, right? Actually, this is the Good Samaritan story from Luke 10, and only about 3% correctly identified. 3%, that would be like what, roughly 9 people. That's not a lot of people. Good Samaritan story from Luke 10. What are the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible or the Christian Old Testament? 12% got all 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Average student got 1.6, so not doing so hot there. And what is the golden rule? 63% correctly identified: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. God helps those who help themselves. Is this in the Bible? And if so, where? 76.5% knew this was not in the Bible, that's impressive to me, honestly, because, gosh, this is just really popular that people think that this is in the Bible. The closest scriptural parallel is actually Surah 13:11 of the Quran. Verily, Allah does not change a people's condition unless they change their inner selves. This is probably the closest that we're going to get in a holy text to God helps those who help themselves. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. Does this appear in the Bible? If so, where? 61% knew this was in the Bible. Only 16% knew it was from the Sermon on the Mount, which is kind of a big deal. Name the 10 Commandments. List as many as you can. Average got 4.6. Only 4 students named all 10. Name the 4 noble truths of Buddhism. 2 people named all 4. So less than 1%. On average, students got about 17% of them, which would mean that they got less than 1. There's only 4 of them, so you get 1 right, you get 25%. So the 4 noble truths here are all life is suffering, which I think we can all probably get on board with that to at least to a degree, to say that, life in general is just, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering, that kind of thing. Suffering comes from desire, so if you didn't want things, then you wouldn't suffer. So you kind of get on board with that a little bit to see where they're coming from. If we release desire, we cease suffering. And we can do this through the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. One of the ways that you can think of Buddhism is Buddhism directly influences the Jedi Order in Star Wars. And so the whole notion from Star Wars of anger leads to hate and hate leads to the dark side, like that is 100% informed from Buddhism. Okay, so that's where that's coming from. What are the 7 sacraments of Catholicism? List as many as you can. As Protestants, we don't necessarily always call these sacraments. A lot of times we'll just say that, they're practices or something like that, memorial, that kind of thing. Average got 2.5, or average was 2.5% here. And as Protestants, we only actually hold over usually 2 of these as sacraments, if we call them sacraments. And those would be baptism and Eucharist. Eucharist is communion or the Lord's Supper. But baptism, confirmation, the Eucharist, penance, extreme unction, holy orders, and matrimony. These are the 7 sacraments. Then First Amendment says 2 things about religion, each in its own clause. What are the 2 religion clauses from the First Amendment? 32% knew at least one answer. And the 2 answers are the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. And what this means is government will not establish any religion, so the government will tell you what religion you have to be a part of. And then the Free Exercise Clause is the government won't tell you how to do your religion, right? So they won't tell you what religion you have to be a part of, and they won't tell you how to practice your religion. Those are the two clauses. And what is Ramadan, and what religion is it celebrated? Ramadan literally is just the name of the month that this is celebrated. 62% knew that it was Islamic, 38% knew that it was a fast. It's the 9th month of the Muslim year, during which strict fasting is observed from sunrise to sunset. Actually, if you talk to people in the Muslim world that observe this, grocery bills tend to go up during Ramadan because you end up eating more once sunset occurs than you would have normally, right? Because you've been fasting all day long. So this celebrates the initial revelation of the Quran. That's the purpose for that. Then at the end of the quiz, you have sort of this matching where you match Bible characters with the stories in which they appeared. So we have Adam and Eve and Paul and Moses and Noah and Jesus and Abraham and the serpent. You have to match them with Exodus, the binding of Isaac, the olive branch, Garden of Eden, parting of the Red Sea, road to Damascus, Garden of Gethsemane. 96% correctly placed Adam and Eve, which is kind of to be expected. 93% correctly associated Moses with the Red Sea, which is also kind of to be expected, at least in popular culture, but, media, stuff like that, that tends to get connected. Only 30% put Paul on the Damascus road, and 13% put the serpent in Gethsemane, which is the one that just makes me chuckle. The statistics for this, we got Prothero's quiz in 2006 and 2007. Catholics got about half right. Atheists and agnostics got 31%, 26%, so about a third. Hindus, Buddhists, and Sikhs, which I'm not sure why he grouped them that way, because those are 3 different groups, but maybe demographically they just weren't significant on their own. There weren't enough Hindus or enough Buddhists or enough Sikhs, and so he grouped them together. I'm not sure, but yeah. Anyway, they also got about a third. The Jewish population got a little bit better than a third, and then Protestants got just under half. And so the big point here is that nobody's passing. You can take the atheist agnostic scores and double them, and they still aren't passing. So nobody's doing real well on this. And Prothero actually wrote a book about religious literacy, which is fantastic, that I would highly recommend if you're interested in this sort of thing. As Christians who believe in spreading the gospel, this is the kind of thing that we really ought to take seriously. We really ought to know what other people believe, because if we're going to talk to them about the gospel, we need to be able to contextualize the gospel for them in a meaningful way. So my own statistics, just because I thought it'd be interesting to start keeping some stats for myself. RU there is Radford University. So Radford University is the public university that I taught at. And so kept stats for it for a few years. Not every year that I taught, because I just didn't occur to me to do so. But you can see, for this, I did even more than that. I did minimum score, I did maximum score, I did average score, and I did it on entry, and I did it on exit. So you can see our average increases, and so that's nice. That's what we would kind of hope to see. But still, even so, our exiting average is still not great. And our entry average, man, gosh, just not good at all. And then our entry average here, not good. At least with LPU, the 1 year that I taught it, that I actually kept the statistics from it in LPU, we did pretty well on entry. Maximum score is pretty good, and our minimum score, honestly, was pretty good. So it did okay in comparison to the rest. Still a failing score, and our maximum score is still just barely passing. So, so this is the kind of thing that we really should take more seriously, that we really should know these things a bit better.